the church's views on many things are well known, and quite often reputation and PR is known for the wrong reasons. Particularly, we'll come to the likes of this passage by Paul, matters of human sexuality. Probably the most common stereotype is from outside the church is that the church's view on these things is positively Victorian. And the church hasn't always done very much to perhaps dissuade that view. The other view is that the church is moralistic and looking to police kind of general society, telling folks what they can and can't do. And if that's the only view that we've given ourselves, then we have done a very poor job indeed, because the way that the New Testament particularly talks about the nature of Christian life, it goes into an enormous amount of background detail, and it gives people good reasons and resources for thinking through why they live the way that they do. Now, Paul is writing into a deeply pagan culture, meaning that there are as many gods as you can count or as you would like to stack up, and you can go to them all for different reasons, and their worship is spread all across the city, and indeed there's sometimes ritual prostitution that is part of their worship. So it's always handy to have in the background of our minds, well, that's where these kind of letters are written to and into that culture and context, and so that at least gives us some understanding of the colour and the shade that it takes. But ultimately, we've been thinking in this letter about how this is a small group of folks, of new believers who have encountered the good news of Jesus. It's made a difference and it's changed their lives. They've become a really strong community, and they've become so good at it that they're kind of a model to other churches of what it looks like when the love of God really takes root in a culture and in a group of people. And Paul picks up on that, and the overall message that is here is far from being heavy or moralizing. I'd like to put to you is, you're doing a good job, do more of the same. Or here's where you can fill in some of the bits that you don't quite get. Here's how you can make your Christianity really practical so that it's clearly seen to be grown up, mature and thinking religion and faith. And that's going to be a good advert to outsiders, but it's also going to benefit and bless all your individual lives and indeed your life as a group of people. So I want to look at three things in the passage John read for us. I want to look at first the progress that they are making as a group of people and the importance of progress in the Christian life. Then I want to look at proper love, because I think that's what the passage on sexuality is really all about. I don't think it's as sensational as we're often led to believe it is. And then lastly, I want to look at peace and quiet, because that's what he encourages them to live as well. And that's probably my favourite bit, because who doesn't want a bit more peace and quiet? I've got 3 kids at home, and I've just done the October holidays with the 3 of them at home. So peace and quiet, I'll take that all day long. Making a bit of progress. As for other matters, brothers and sisters, we instructed you how to live, and just as you are living. That's amazing. Paul hardly ever says this. He hardly ever says, you guys have got it sorted. He's saying, you're doing very well. And Paul's informed by a kind of Greek philosophical background, and the kind of Greek, particularly the Stoic philosophers, they thought there were kind of 2 main ways to learn. There was example and there was precept. There was teaching somebody something, telling them, here's the principles, here's the marks you've got to hit. And there's also example. And Paul's kind of saying, you guys have got it all. You saw me when I was with you and how I lived and how I kind of applied the good news of Jesus to my own life and tried to live it out. But you've also picked up the teaching points that I've given you, and you're running with that. Now we urge you in the Lord Jesus to do this more and more, to do more of the same. For you know what instructions we gave you by the authority of Jesus. Now, this is all couched in relationship, and I made a wee thing on our podcast about this a couple of weeks ago about what the church is and the purpose of it. And a lot of the purpose of it is relationship. If we're going to make progress in the Christian faith and in Christian life, it's quite difficult to do it in isolation, because a lot of the things that we are instructed to live into, to be very practical about, whether it's showing love and service and concern for other folks, for folks worse off than us, whether it's looking to encourage and build each other up, all that stuff we can only really do in community. So that community is essential in order to enable us to make progress. And Paul's saying all of this is the way to please God. And so this is a really easy tick to get in the Christian life, is to go, well, one of the things that's pleasing to God is that we live in some kind of community where we share this experience of faith together. And there are parts of our faith that really only get unlocked when we practice them in community. Because we're able to see ourselves, the difference that we are making. We are able to have other people relate and speak into our lives and encourage us to continue to make progress. But they are making progress. We instructed you how to live to please God, just as you are living. So he's saying, we gave you a little bit, and you move forward with what we told you, and by following the example that we gave you, and you're now even just an inch further on than you were the last time that we saw you. Now, this is massive. I don't want to kind of skip over this, because I think a lot of people ask, how do I please God? It's a big question. Maybe for more of us, the question we often ask is, how do I please my significant other? Or we've got people in our life and there's no pleasing them. They're never happy, they're insatiable, it doesn't matter what we do. And sometimes we extrapolate that kind of thing to God, and I think a lot of us have a very deep background view of, I don't think God's ever happy with me, or he never seems to be, or he doesn't give me signs, or it's just an unknowable quantity. How do I please God? And what I think can be really helpful for folks is realizing that the Christian life, or even just being reminded of this, that it isn't a sprint, that most of us are in this for a long haul. And if you feel like you haven't been pleasing God lately, or you've not done a great job of it, or he's not very pleased with you just now, is that time is a great gift. And chipping away, looking to put things in place and be practical and move a little bit forward. You and I are, in the Christian life, people under renovation. Some of us sometimes get either a dramatic experience of coming to faith all at once, or we... I'm thinking of like computer games when you get to jump up a level. Sometimes we feel like, I've really moved on in my spirituality, my Christian faith, my obedience, my knowledge, my understanding. But I think for most of us, most of the time, it is chipping away and making slow progress over time, putting another dent in it, feeling like we've made a little bit of progress. I loved John Newton's quote where he says, I am not what I ought to be, and I'm not what I should be, but by the grace of God, I am not what I used to be. That's a lot of what it is. And it's great to be able to encourage each other with that. And I think this is important as a pastor, because I love to be able to encourage you. This is a warm, welcoming, generous church who gets so many of the basics of what Christian faith should be about. It gets them right. I want to encourage you this morning. I want to try and give you some sense of the fact that that's something that is pleasing to God, because it's not a given, and not all churches are like that, and not all Christian people are like that. So I think we need to take a leaf out of the Paul the Great Pastor's book and go, you know what, well done, let's take a pat on the back. We're making progress, we're continuing to grow in love and faith and generosity. Making progress is sometimes very incremental, and give yourself permission to be a work in progress and for it to take a wee while. Now, proper love is what the kind of spicy bit in the middle of it is all about. It's God's will that you should be sanctified. So that word sanctified just means that, making progress, becoming a bit more like God and like Jesus day by day, year by year. That you should avoid sexual immorality and learn to control your own body in a way that's holy and honourable, not in passionate lust like the pagans. Okay, let's deal with this. So, sexual immorality, the word behind that in the Greek is porneia, which you will recognize from the prevalence of pornography in our society. And the difficulty that we have is that Paul uses it as a catch-all term for, and the ancient Greeks used it as a catch-all term for whatever they considered taboo, beyond the pale. You can't do that, okay? But we don't have access to that list or don't know what it was. And it would have been hugely informed by their culture. So I have had the privileged task of spending this week reading a lot of ancient literature, trying to figure out what that was in their culture. I'm going to do my best to try and give you a sense of that. So in the ancient Greek and Roman world, the male was the head of a household, and had enormous privilege, and that extended to sexuality as well. And so it was, although it was considered normal for them to get married, they would normally get married as men later in life to much younger women, but they didn't have a huge amount of restrictions. So while they could express themselves sexually with their wife, there was also no real taboos around them if they wanted to engage in prostitution. Or indeed, they often had slaves in the house as well, male and female, and there wasn't really any social stigma either. There was a little bit by the time of the New Testament, but generally that was not considered hugely beyond the pale because they are privileged and they are able to express themselves as they wish. Women, there was actually less women in the society at the time because having a girl wasn't thought of as being as desirable, so the ancient Romans quite often had the practice of exposure. They would kind of leave the infant to die if it wasn't exactly something they wanted. That led to a decline in the population of women, led to an increase in the population of women sold into slavery, including, tavern and brothel slavery. So that meant there was an enormous disparity and lack of equality in that society, and that leads to a huge disparity in terms of sexuality, who's allowed to express it, who's considered to be shameful when they do, and so on. Do you see? Very, very different world to ours. So for us to lift that, now some of your translations it will say fornication, but I don't think that is a good translation either, because that's come to mean something in our world that it didn't mean in the ancient world either. It wasn't addressing that. So, what is Paul saying? He's saying you should learn to control your members. It says members of the body here. Without putting too fine a point in it, my estimation is, from having studied it this week, is that Paul is saying, men, mostly, you are the guys with all the agency, all the freedom in the society. You should learn to control what you have, because that is where things are becoming a bad advert for the gospel. Not probably in the Thessalonian church, but think of it, they're in that culture, in that world, and he's trying to give them an ethic that is going to be more in keeping with what is going to be not only pleasing to God, but lead to their flourishing as a society, but also be different from the society around them. He goes on to say they should control their members and learn to do it in a way that is holy and honourable, not in passionate lust, and not like those who don't know God. No one should take advantage of a brother or sister. Now think about that world where if you are a freeborn male and you're at the top of the tree, you are able to, quote unquote, take advantage of a lot of different people in that society, and there's no other punishment. And quite radically, Paul is taking what was really an Old Testament ethic of sexuality, which was, your body is not totally separate to your soul. So it's not like you can have this connection and relationship to God, and it's kind of, if you like, a church or a Sunday thing, and then your body's this different thing, and it's going to die anyway one day, so it doesn't matter what you do with it. He's saying, actually, God has made the whole of your person in his image. And God has made the whole of every other person around you in his image. That means there's something sacred about them. That means there's something elevated about them. That means that whatever your culture and society around you considers normal and okay, there might be a better way to live than just going along with it. There might be a better way to show what God is like. And do you know what I think this really all comes down to? Because, man, it's hard to separate. When Paul says passionate lust, I mean, there were Stoic philosophers that were hugely influential at the time that said that, even within marriage, if you enjoyed anything a bit too much, that was, pretty dodgy ground. They had radically different views about nearly everything culturally to us. But what I think is the core of this that is relevant to them and to us and continues today is do not use other people. That is not pleasing to God. That's not, and he couches all this, and this is how we practically please God. This is what it looks like day to day. This is what we do with our bodies that is pleasing to God. Is we don't use other people. Society might say it's okay. There are lots of things that aren't taboo in our society anymore. I mean, prostitution is still, but again, that massively punishes and criminalizes women rather than men, and we haven't really moved on that much in those kinds of ways. So it's up to us as the kind of redeemed people of God, being the community of the people of God, to go, whatever we do think and believe about sexuality, we do not use other people. We put love in its proper place. It is something where we look to give rather than what we take. And whether it is prostitution or pornography or whatever versions of things that we have around today, particularly as they're commercialized, these are developed in our society to give us all more of what we want and to be on the take and to take. But human sexuality, as seen through the prism of the gospel and of God as our creator, is like, actually, God has given us this amazing charge and this amazing elevated status of we are people who represent and bear his image. And then when we start to see everybody else like that, a lot of the problems that we have from disordered and distorted sexuality, they would go if people genuinely saw each other as image bearers of the living and the true God. Because they would be like, well, you're precious, so I'm not going to use you. I am going to make sure that this is not about me and what I can extract or get out of you. I'm going to make sure that this is about how you continue to feel valued and sacred. That my actions and the way I behave to you, that helps you understand more. My goodness, I must be worthy of dignity. I mean, even the word what he uses, holy and honorable, that is to ascribe a huge amount of worth and dignity. Not just to others, but he's telling them, do that to yourselves. Because sometimes when people have struggled with disordered sexuality, it's because, I don't want to get too deep into this, but, things in their background kind of communicated to them that they aren't honorable, that they are there to be used. And see, when you dig into this, Christianity gives us such deep resources to address some of these endemic things in our culture, because there is so much of that. And it is our calling to communicate this vision, this grand view of what we are as created beings, including with sexuality, and how not only do we please God, but we help other human beings around us flourish, and we lift them up by treating them as image bearers with proper love, the way God intended and instituted it. Does that make sense? Okay, and finally, and most briefly, peace and quiet. You love, they're encouraged, we've dealt with this before, you love God's family throughout Macedonia, so they're good at that, as are you. We urge you to do so more and more, but also to make it your ambition to lead a quiet life. You should mind your own business and work with your hands, just as we told you. So, it's interesting because there were different views in the early Christian community about when Jesus would come back. And do you know what's still one of the things I get asked the most is, do you think we're in the end times? Do you think it's, is the war that's happening in the Middle East just now, is that a sign that God's coming back? And so my headline view is everything between Jesus having been resurrected and when he does come back again, that's all the end times. So we're 2,000 odd years into the end times already. So I'm not going to be drawing any charts or making any predictions. But some of them thought, well, if that's going to happen in 5 minutes' time, you know what, I'll down tools. There's no point in going to the blacksmiths tomorrow if Jesus is about to come back and he'll sort everything out. So, and he's saying, no, don't do that. That doesn't look good. And Christianity since the start, and you still get cultures of Christianity that are like this, they're very escapist. They're very like, I don't want to get too involved in the world, or, the world's a bit wrong and dirty, and, I don't want to... I know Christians who think that they can't really have secular jobs because the world will pollute and corrupt them too much, and that's never been Christianity. It's always been, especially here, Paul saying, you know what, just dig in wherever you are and allow your faith and the value that you have for other people and the value that God has shown you and what you know about Jesus, allow that to do the talking. He's saying, you know what, get on with it. Stop speculating, stop downing tools. Or the other thing that's quite possible is in the Roman society, Christianity had a wee bit of a pass in terms of not having to worship Nero the emperor Caesar the emperor, because they were connected to Judaism, which was a kind of, it was a religion that had special dispensation. But they were kind of threatening quite often with getting that removed, because sometimes they would go and be rabble-rousers in the local town and, start to draw the wrong kinds of attention to themselves. And this is all about, well, how do we do faith publicly, and what's a good advert for faith, what looks good. I remember being asked, I don't think it was long after I came to Erskine, someone asked me, did I want to go and do handing out tracts down at Bridgewater, down at Morrison's, and I politely declined. Now, you see me here every week. I'm not afraid of my faith. I don't mind telling you that I believe in Jesus and the difference that's made in my life. But I don't know if handing out that bit of paper is necessarily going to really make anyone else believe it. And I don't know if I want to be known for that myself. Is that the advert that I want them to get of God, that I think I've got everything right, and so I'm trying to give that to you, and if you only take what I'm saying, then you'll, and maybe there's better ways of thinking it, but it's no for me. And that's not the way. I would rather, like this, do things quietly, get to know people, and then we don't trust enough in the gospel, because the radical thing about Christianity is God has come to make his home in you and I by his Holy Spirit. I mean, that's why Paul says to be honorable with your bodies, because it's the temple of the Holy Spirit. It houses the very life of God within you. If God is within you and me, that is enormously powerful things God can do by you and me just being me, and being where we are, and being in places where we can have conversations and where we can make connections with people. Do you see? So sometimes the best way to go about being practical about our Christianity is not by shouting it from the rooftops, and certainly not making a nuisance of ourselves, but by quietly getting on with it. Consider this your permission to, if you have faith, quietly get on with it. And another really good way to do that is just to pray and to say to God, God, you use my faith. You use what I believe about you. You use my love and my good works and my desire to serve other people and to see the best in them. You use that, and then see what God does. There's maybe a challenge for us in the coming week, but the more things change, the more they stay the same, because Paul's talking to a group of people who are surrounded with lots of different ideas in culture that aren't the same as Christianity. And he's saying to them, this is how you get it to take root. This is what you're doing well. Keep doing that. Do more of the same. This is the amazing, expansive view of sexuality that you get from the Christian gospel. And you guys hold on to that, and you guys honor and love and put love in its proper place and make sure other people are seen as image bearers and treat them accordingly, and see what that does. And by working hard, by being peaceful, by looking to have peace with other people, by looking to mind our own business and get on with things, then, well, hey, it worked, because this is a very early church. This is one of the earliest letters we have in the New Testament. And we're still here, figuring these things out, trying to do the same thing. But this is all guided by the gospel, because Jesus came, he elevated humanity, he lifted people up as image bearers, particularly with men and women. He lifted women up who were on the short end of the stick in society as well. He went about things and making a difference. And he ultimately, he gave up his life and his rights and all of those things in order that you and I might have life. And so it's teaching us about purpose, about sacrifice, about being encouraged to continue doing what we're doing. And ultimately, you know what? It's not as hard as you might think to please God. It's easier to please God than it is to please people, because he's told us what a good life looks like. He's told us how we can not only know him in the first place, but how we can add to that week by week. And ultimately, we get to live with the understanding that he is pleased with us because he's loved us to the uttermost. May God bless his word to us. Amen.